So this is where it gets into controversial territory, because we've got a world right now who seem to be completely divided. And on both sides, you've just got people screaming at each other saying, well, Imane Khelif, well, it doesn't matter because that's a girl, she's a girl, and that was it, and it doesn't matter. And then other people going, what do you mean that's just a guy? And all I've seen is there was sort of one or two tests from, is it the IBA?
IBA, yeah.
The IBA. And other people are disputing this. So where are we with him?
Yeah, so what we know from the IBA is, first of all, no, maybe we should go back a little bit and think about the IOC here. So
okay, that's the Olympic Committee.
The International Olympic Committee. Now, usually in an Olympic competition, the particular sports are managed and regulated by their international federations. So in this case, the track and field that we're seeing at the moment, that's all regulated by World Athletics. When it's come to boxing, the International Olympic Committee has disaffiliated the IBA, who would normally be managing these events. Oh. And they've done that for assertions of lack of financial transparency, the kind of standard corruption charges that some sports federations accrue from time to time. So what the IOC have said is that you're not managing boxing at the Olympics. And actually, this was the case in 2020, which we still call it, even though it happened in 2021. It was the case in Tokyo and is the case now in Paris. The IOC said, you're not running it, you're corrupt. We're going to manage it. And so what we've now got is a tension between two sports bodies with different rules on eligibility for the female category. So the IBA, the International Boxing Association, says that their categories are based on chromosomes. The male category is XY, the female category is XX, and that they've tested these athletes. There was a press conference just today where they said, we can't tell you the results. There are privacy and medical confidentiality issues there. We can't tell you the results. The athlete's not eligible for the female XX category. You need to read between the lines. So that's very directly, albeit in a slightly roundabout way, saying that these athletes are XY. Now, what the IOC's position seems to be is that they don't support the concept of sex testing at all. So they're not dealing with the results that the IBA say they've given to the IOC. What they're saying is, you shouldn't have tested them.
Wow.
So they're refusing to acknowledge that the testing process is valid, let alone what the results of that testing process are. Their eligibility for boxing is based on legal documents. And they've mentioned what's on your passport. And what we know, and I'm not remotely suggesting that's happened actually with these athletes, but what we know is that many countries now, when they're trying to deal with, cohorts of people who have gender identities that maybe they're saying don't match their sex, and they're allowing people to change their legal documents. So a passport really isn't a reliable indicator of what your sex at birth was. It may be, in this case, these athletes may have been observed as female at birth. But it's certainly not what's important in sport, which is all of that internal hormones and testes or ovaries that are really driving your physical development, at key times of your life, like puberty.
And that's why this is, although it's not a trans issue, in a very roundabout way, it sort of is, because the feeling among a lot of gender critical people, I suppose, is that the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, is perhaps ideologically captured and therefore less willing to actually look at the biology here and more willing to focus on some woo-woo of passports and things.
Yeah, and I've been very critical of the IOC, and I remain very critical of the IOC. Me and 25 other academics published a paper this year talking about the IOC's kind of vision, if you like, their framework for how sports should think about these questions. And that was a framework that very definitely said, we're talking about transgender athletes and we're talking about athletes with differences of sex development. So they're two separate cohorts, but they are kind of co-regulated together. And according to the IOC, that should be based on their gender identity. It should account for, in the case of certainly the transgender community of athletes, but perhaps some of these athletes with DSDs who are modulating their hormones, how that changes how we think about their categorization. That's the IOC position. It's very much a rights framework. Our paper was very strongly of the opinion that they are ignoring an evidence base, and that they are, that their framework just really isn't scientific. I'm not clear that they want to have a scientific framework. They want to be rights-led. They want non-discrimination based on gender identity. That's something separate from my point of view. We're talking about sports. We're talking about bodies. It doesn't matter what someone's gender identity is. It doesn't matter what political party they vote for. It doesn't matter what religion they are. In fact, sport is something that's always been pitched as bringing together this, amazing diversity of people, and starting to ignore those, geopolitical boundaries that have, separate us in our non-sports life. So it's quite interesting to see this clash of what the IBA and in fact what a lot of other sports federations are doing, which is we need to think about biology here, and the IOC saying you need to think about gender non-discrimination.
That's why to an extent it is a trans issue, or an issue around this ideology, and really frustrating, and can lead to women getting punched in the face by men, which most people hopefully don't want to see. Are there then, with that, if that's their stipulation at the IOC, are there trans athletes at the moment? I don't know of any. Could Leah Thomas be swimming this year? No.
So we don't know of any. We know that there are some female-born people, I will call them females, who have a non-binary identity. So they're saying they're not actually female, but nor are they male.
Just want attention.
It's a kind of special identity that actually isn't really accounted for in any sporting regulation, although people are trying. But so we have some females who say they're non-binary, or who in fact say they're trans men.
Okay.
Who are competing within the female category. And that's okay as long as they're not taking testosterone, which would be a doping violation, right? We don't allow people to supplement testosterone. So there are trans athletes. There aren't, to my knowledge, any males who say they're women competing in the female category. And that, to some extent, has been down to athletes like Leah Thomas and Emily Bridges in cycling. So these major Olympic sports, track and field, cycling and swimming, have had these very highlight cases over the last couple of years, the last 3 years or so. And they've been forced, their hand has been forced to regulate for this, because it's quite clear that the scientific consensus is for males who say they're women, and even when they take hormone treatments to suppress testosterone, they don't lose their male physicality, okay? They've acquired male height, they've acquired broad shoulders and narrow hips, bigger muscles, all those kinds of things that we know, frankly, make men better at sport. They can't erase that history of their male development. And so there are serious issues about fairness here. And what it's taken is athletes thrust into the limelight. And that's what's happening now, albeit for athletes who, by my rationale, are male, but aren't trans. They're male with a DSD. And we still have to think about the same things. And we're still dealing, for years we've been saying this, you need to start regulating for this before those athletes are on the front page of a newspaper, or before they're thrown into the pit of social media. Because what is going to happen, and we can, speak what I think is neutrally, but realistically, not everyone is, inclined to be charitable. Yeah. Not everyone is inclined to be able to divide, what do we think about in terms of society versus what we need for sport. And it really is a failure of some federations. They're just waiting and waiting. We don't need to regulate, or we don't need to think about this. And what they're saying is we're going to wait for one of our athletes to be on that stage with all of this, spotlight on them. And that's really, really an awful situation.
It's so hard, isn't it? I think about, you were saying about the trans men appear to be competing with the women. And it just seems, sometimes I wonder, why are the trans women, why do they want to go with the women? Is it because they really feel like women? But the trans men don't seem to have a problem competing with women. So what does that say to us about trans women, so men who want to compete with the women. It just feels like a sort of South Park satire where they really want an easier ride and want to win. I don't want to just jump to that conclusion, because I know that not everybody, I mean, most people are sort of not just bad people, they think they're good and they want to win but they feel like they really are a woman or whatever it might be. I don't want to jump to, assume malice when there might be just they're not quite all there.
Yeah, and at the risk of saying not all transgender women, there have been transgender women who've stayed in the male category because they've said, I was born male, and that means something for sport. So we do see a small minority. We're not talking about a large cohort of athletes to start with, but we do see some males who want to live as women, whatever that means, and want to identify themselves to the rest of the world as women, but who in sport have a much more kind of, what I would say, sensible understanding of what that means for sport. And I think the understanding that sometimes is missing as well is sport is something that most of us do socially. So for a lot of us, it's something that we enjoy. It's recreational. We may do, low-level competitions or running around or that kind of thing. And for a lot of the population, sport is some kind of vehicle for social purposes, when actually, for athletes, it's not really, or it doesn't need to be anything connected to that. It's something that is important to get right in terms of the science and the biology. And, obviously not all athletes are just using sport as a vehicle for, their identity or to feel validated in a particular identity. So
complicated.
Yeah, there's a tension between sport as a human right, which I don't think sport is a human right. And whether sport is just some kind of social good and we make some rules about it. And in this case, here are your eligibility rules. If you don't like them, you don't have to compete. For some people, that would sound like we're banning athletes. Nobody wants to ban anyone from sport. I don't think it's a human right, but I think it's a really good thing for people to do. In the same way, I think it's really good for people to listen to music or, read a good book. It's a good thing for people to do.
Yeah.